Be joyful, keep the faith, and do the simple things well. The last words of St. David. Indeed, the many legends of St. David went down through the generations orally until almost 500 years after his death, when they were collected by one of his followers, whose name I'm not going to attempt to pronounce, I'm afraid. But the traditions had been kept for David for a long time. But a number of years ago, of course, one of the key traditions is that he was born at the top of a hill in Wales in the middle of a violent storm. That's one of the traditions. A number of years ago, however, I heard a lecture, a sermon that was given by Rowan Williams, who reflected on the fact that many of the patron saints of these isles have come from outside the isles, and he said that St. David had actually come from Ireland. So there's another little legend for you. But certainly he would have come through an aristocratic line, and there was a lot of movement across the Irish Sea in that Celtic world, and he brings a lot of traditions from the Celtic monasteries and around the whole way around Brittany and everywhere like that. His influence is seen, and of course it's his feast day is recorded in Maelruin's Martyrology of Tala in the 8th century in Ireland. So there's already a great devotion to him in Ireland from the 8th century. And his biographer, whose name again I'm not going to be able to pronounce, wants to record that he was baptized by St. Ailbe. St. Ailbe, whose foundation in Ireland, monastic foundation in Ireland, was the second important one after the foundation of Patrick in Armagh. So David comes from that very strong missionary tradition of the early Celtic church. And he wanted to put forward, as that Celtic church did, a joyful authenticity in the midst of a world where there were people who were only too ready to preach in heresy. The main person preaching in heresy, of course, being Pelagius. And as a result of that, at the invitation of Paulinus, or the recommendation of Paulinus, David was asked to take part in the Synod of Brevis, which took place in 545. And he there came to prominence, and then and became a bishop. It's said that he made a pilgrimage to Jerusalem and was ordained to the episcopate by the patriarch there, and then came and continued to found his communities based on his rule. His rule was which was a very joyful and frugal rule. It included abstinence from meat, for example, but it was a rule that looked towards looking at a joyful and a simple and a constant penance, which sought to demonstrate and encourage one another in celebrating the mystery of forgiveness. And he then called another synod in 569, the Synod of Victory, in which he consolidated many of the central parts of his rule from the various different communities and monastic foundations around the Celtic seas that he had set up. A joyful frugality and penance that seeks to bring a zest to life. So not a penance that makes us downhearted, but a penance which allows us to acknowledge our own sinfulness and to joyfully receive the Lord's forgiveness and share that with one another, bringing a zest to life. At the Synod of Brevis, it is said that the ground underneath David rose up, and he came up onto the top of a big hill so that his words could be heard more clearly. A miracle of St. David, and that is, of course, the time when he came to prominence. In our gospel reading, we heard about putting the light on a hilltop, and that metaphor of the hilltop is very much there in the life of St. David, the legend that he was born on a hilltop, and then came down from there into the valleys to establish his communities of penance. And then from that, he's brought to prominence by the miraculous hilltop coming up from underneath him. So we can pray that we can follow his example, an example of becoming a church that follows his example of being joyful communities of penance. People who seek to share with one another the joyful news of the gospel, so that a zest, a saltiness can come back to life, and the flavour of our lives can indeed help us to celebrate, so that we can be joyful, maintain the faith, and do the little things, the simple things well.